Welcome to Let's Get Writing. I'm your host, Catherine Taylor. Let's Get Writing is all about the writing process from inspiration to publication. And here is where we share the stories behind the stories. And what better guest could I have than a professional storyteller, author, and folklorist who lives and works in St. John's, Newfoundland, and Labrador. His latest book, and I'll just show it in the screen here, Place Names of Newfoundland and Labrador, explores the hidden stories, strange origins, and fascinating histories of Newfoundland and Labrador's place names. So from Dildo to Dover and Nain to Nippers Harbor, he has it covered. We're going to find out more about that. So please join me in welcoming Dale Jarvis to Let's Get Writing.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm good. Lovely to be here.
Oh, it's great. And we've got your book right in between us here, which is where it should be for the moment. And I myself have often wondered about Newfoundland place names. And I was so excited when I saw the book. I thought, okay, we just have to do this because I feel like Newfoundland is unique. Am I right in thinking that?
You know, I mean, there is something very special about this place. We have really a fascinating, deep history and a real love of storytelling. You know, I think that's part of what sets Newfoundland and Labrador apart, is that we have this great history, but we also love to talk about it. So it's great for people like me.
Yes, it is indeed, because you've been so involved with that your whole career. But now, since this book came out, I noted you had your still virtual launch on April 6th, and I've seen you all over social media. I've been keeping up with you. You're great at the social media, I have to say. And I also saw that your book, I think, is number 2 in the top 5 best-selling books here in Newfoundland from Indigo, Chapters, and Polls. Hey, how's it feel?
Which is really exciting, yeah. And again, I think it's part of that. There is that real hunger here in the province for, stories and history about this place. I think there's a really eager market for people to learn more about the places where they live.
Well, we grow up hearing names like Nipper's Bite and, I don't know, Joe Bat's Arm and Tickles and Heads and whatever. Feet, yeah. All these weird combinations of names. So you get thinking sometimes, well, where did they come from? And then we don't think, I don't know. I hadn't thought more about it because I thought I'll never figure this out. But I mean, at least I'm from a pretty boring name. I'm from Grand Falls, Windsor. So I'm not anything exotic.
Well, but like it's interesting. Like even a town like Grand Falls, Windsor, just the history of the name and the history of those two communities and how the two communities kind of evolved separately, but had very linked histories. Windsor, I think, often gets overlooked sometimes in the Grand Falls, Windsor story, but Windsor I find really fascinating. That's where all the interesting stuff, the non-company stuff, all happened. And Windsor is one of these names that is, it's a royal name, and it is one of the most often repeated names in all of Canada. So like you can go anywhere pretty much in Canada and there's a Windsor something or other named after the royal family.
True enough. So you're making me feel better about my town already.
There you go.
So for that reason alone, maybe people should pick up the book and see if they're featured in it. Now that is one of my questions, Dale, because there are so many small communities and names. How many of them were you able to feature in the book?
I say in the introduction of the book that there was an estimate given, 20 years ago or so now, about official place names in the province. And there was something like 50,000 written down place names, official place names. And we have such we have a really incredible history of resettled communities here, like 600 odd resettled communities. So I really started to have to narrow down what I was actually going to, or else the book would never be done. It would be a 12-volume encyclopedia of names that no one would ever buy because it would be $1,000. But the idea was I would focus with this book just on town names, and even that, like there's still a lot of towns in the province, and so narrowed it down even further to incorporated municipalities, and that at least gave me like 250 odd names to work with. So the book is about 250, 260 names. Most of them are towns that have a council and a mayor. Though some, like Dildo, like I couldn't write a book about Newfoundland place names without including that one. So even though it's not an incorporated municipality, it's still snuck into the book.
Kind of had to be there.
Had to be there. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So now when I think about that, 250 from where you started, which I think was a town for every 10 people on the island.
Yeah.
But from where you started down to 250. But then when I pick up the book and read it, of those 250, every single one of them, you've researched so many things. My next question is, like, how long did it take you to do this? And what were you thinking?
Yeah, this was my pandemic project. So while we were in lockdown, this is how I kept sane, I guess. And yeah, there is a lot of digging. And what I really wanted the book to be was a collection of kind of interesting and quirky stories. There's been a lot of work done in the province from kind of a geographical or historical or linguistic perspective about place names. So some of that information was great for me because it already existed somewhere. But that's not always I wanted the gossip, I wanted the dirt on what was behind some of these names. So some communities, were more challenging than others to find information for. But I think one of the interesting things about place names is we do take them a bit for granted. We use them all the time. The names of our towns and streets and hills and whatever. Everything has a name. And we don't think too often about where that name comes from or what kind of cultural information is kind of hidden inside that name. So yeah, lots of opportunities to get into the odd and strange stories behind some of these places.
Yeah, so what did you do? Did you go out to the communities and talk to people, or did you Zoom it? Or, I mean, I know you can do the research. You're right in the center of all of our information in St. John's, or anyone with a computer. But how did you get the behind the scenes stuff?
Yeah, well, and so then there was also this added challenge that writing it during a pandemic.
Yeah.
And the province is huge. Like, I think sometimes people have a misconception about the size of Newfoundland and Labrador, which is even larger. So getting around to all of these places, as much as I would have loved to, was kind of impossible. But I found that, if I had a question these days, with social media and every little town has a Facebook page or whatnot, there was always someone I could track down. So I wrote a lot of town clerks and mayors and said, what do you know about this name or that name? And we also have the benefit here in this province of having really good online resources through Memorial University. There's a great archive, the Digital Archive project that they have, where they've digitized thousands of newspapers and books and everything. So for people who are interested in doing historical research, I know, like, when I started doing research, you had to sit down with the microfiche and go through for hours looking for everything. And now so much more of that information is available digitally. Even in the last 10 years, it's amazing what's now available online to researchers.
And you'd be a good one to know that because you are an adjunct prof with the Department of Folklore at MUN. So you'd be kind of tuned into what's available and these resources on top of all that. But, I find in the book as well, and I think it comes through in talking to you, your sense of humor shines through in the book. I mean,
people don't want to read a list, you know, and I think that was kind of a danger in writing the book. Like, it very much could have been just an endless list of names and dates and facts. And I know as a storyteller that people can only listen or read information for a short period of time. But it's the stories, it's those human things, it's the humorous elements, that's what kind of captures people's imaginations about places. So I deliberately went out looking for the stories that I thought would make people smile or chuckle or go, I never knew that about the place where I grew up.
Yeah, and we're glad you did, because we don't want a dry read. How could you have a dry read about the names of places in Newfoundland and Labrador?
Yeah.
Just couldn't happen. But one of my favorites, when I was going through the book, you were talking about Gayside changing its name to Baytona, and we kind of know time moved on from names, and the connotation of community named Gayside wasn't as great anymore. And so the mayor said, and I'm asking, he said, whenever a mainland tourist was told the name of the community, they looked at us right queer.
Yeah. And who knows if that's a true story or not, but it was too good. It was quoted in the newspaper, and that was good enough for me. I had to include that little story. It's interesting, like we have a big tradition of changing the names of places as well. So not only do we have place names, but we have layers of place names. So places like Baytona, which is a terrible name in some ways, that was designed by a committee of people. People are, I think, becoming more interested in what some of those original names were and getting a little bit more protective. Like the community of Portagrave, for example, in Conception Bay. Like many communities, it kind of incorporates smaller places. And one of those places was Hibbs Hole. We have lots of holes, Nanny's Hole, and all kinds of holes in Newfoundland. And I think there was a time when people were a little maybe nervous about, using some of those names, or were a little uncertain about it. But I think now people are very proud, and rightfully proud, that we have these quirky and odd place names here. I think this generation will kind of ensure that some of those older, quirkier names still are maintained.
Yeah, and you're quite right, and that's the wonderful thing about Dildo. I mean, look what that did for the community, just by embracing that name and accepting it. So maybe Baytona, which I find such a hard name to say. I think of Daytona all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Baytona will reconsider too down the road.
Who knows? Someone needs to start a petition. Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, of course. Now, you also work as the executive director of Heritage Newfoundland and Labrador, and you've been there with that organization for a long, long time. I think, would it be right in saying 26 years?
Yeah, maybe? there wasn't a gray hair on my head when I started here back in the 90s. So the Heritage Foundation of Newfoundland and Labrador, Heritage NL for social, in the era of social media marketing, we shortened it down. We're a government kind of crown agency and not for profit, and we were set up to really look at heritage buildings. So when you would travel around the province and you'd see a heritage plaque on a building, or if someone got a grant to fix up an old building, that was us. And over the last, since 2008, I guess, we've kind of expanded our work, and we're much more interested in some of those more intangible pieces of our heritage as well, not just buildings, but our storytelling traditions and our customs. We started the Mummers Festival in St. John's, which has grown and is now its own organization, kind of celebrating those Christmas time traditions. I took over a year ago as executive director. And it's fabulous to me that I have a day job that, I love, that I can go and I get to explore all these things that are part of all the other things that I love as well.
That's wonderful. And when you think about it, you're so right that to see it evolve to the intangible things makes so much sense, because we are so much more than buildings. And but I do think, if I recall reading your bio, the buildings and the architecture was what brought you here in the first place, was it not? Or
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
Labrador?
I was
Yeah.
born in Ontario. I'm a come from away, and I came to Newfoundland to go to Memorial to do a program in the master's program in the Department of Folklore with an interest in heritage buildings. And the plan was that I would come for 2 years and then go off on my merry way somewhere else. And that was in 1994. And I'm still here. I got messed up with a woman from around the bay, and then the rest is history, right? You can't escape. Then you're stuck.
No, you're stuck.
But it's my home. I love it. I love it here. I've lived here longer than I've lived anywhere else, and really just kind of thrown myself into the history and folklore of this place. It's really my main passion, I guess.
Yeah, well, as we say here, we're right happy you come here to help us with this and that. Home is not where you're born, it's where you make it. And you're a shining example of that. Now, in your role there, how much of our culture and traditional knowledge has been lost?
Yeah, it's a really good question.
Yeah.
I moved to the island in '94, so that was just like 2 years after the cod moratorium. And my very first job, actually, for the Heritage Foundation, Heritage NL, was doing work out on the Bonavista Peninsula and going around and doing an architectural survey. And so many houses were boarded up. So many people had moved away in the '90s. So much unemployment. And tourism was kind of a thing to a certain extent, but it really hadn't exploded yet in the way that, tourism is such an important part of the economy now. So it's kind of an interesting time for me as someone from away to come here and start doing work, because it was very clear that there were changes happening in communities. And with the work that we're doing now, one of the projects that I'm really proud of that we've been working on for the last couple of years is a craft at risk program. So identifying all those things like boat building or snowshoe making or traditional Mi'kmaq beadwork or spruce root baskets or whatever it happens to be, and then finding ways to document that. And we've started a mentor apprentice program so that someone who has skills in some of those areas can pass their skills along to other people. So you ask, like, what have we lost? I think to a certain extent, we are at a really critical point where we can still prevent things from being lost. We've seen a lot of buildings get torn down. We've seen a lot of change in our communities, but we still have some of that really important knowledge. And so a big part of what we do and what I do is finding ways to get communities thinking and sharing knowledge and stories and skills. That for me as a folklorist, that's really exciting, because it's not just something that I want to study, it's something that I want to see continue on. So I think, there's definitely things at risk, and maybe there's some aspects of culture or some traditions that we have lost. But many of those things can come back. We're doing some really fun work right now with there's an old forge out in Heart's Content, and we've got the forge up. We're getting the forge up and running, and there's a young Newfoundland woman who has gone away to blacksmith school in Canada, and she's moved back and is going to be working in the forge, teaching blacksmithing skills for women. So there's lots of really exciting kind of cultural revitalization stuff happening all across the province.
Yes, and we do see it. I see it in different organizations that I'm involved with. Enlo, for example, the different members and what they're doing and what they're looking at. And it's exciting because I believe people and tourists and even residents of the province were wanting this. We're wanting to know. And maybe in part, COVID slowed us down enough that we had to sit with ourselves and figure out, well, who are we? And why are we always in a rush? Why can't we appreciate what we have, the gifts we have right here?
I'm sure that you're the same as me, that, you know, your Facebook feeds or whatever over the last 2 years, it's been full of everyone, you know, learning how to make sourdough bread or learning how to darn socks or whatever it is. Like, there's been a real interest, I think, in some of those traditional crafts and traditional things. You know, those of us who live on the island part of the province, you know, I think there's a growing recognition that we need to be concerned about things like where our food comes from. Like, when the boats don't run, you know, we start to see that on the shelves. And so some of those old knowledges around like how we find food and process food and preserve food, you know, how many people, you know, I know the first year of the pandemic, around Conception Bay, where I live, it was hard to find potatoes, seed potatoes in the spring. Everyone decided that that was the year that they were going to plant potatoes. So like a lot of these older traditions, like I said before, like they can kind of start to die down, but I think they're just kind of waiting for us to kind of come back and pay a bit of attention to them.
Yeah, it's been a good thing. And I know some of my guests that I've had on, for example, the saltwater mittens ladies, and people wanting those. Yeah. That's worldwide. People want these, and they've retrieved patterns that were never written down, because these things weren't written down. So they've created that. I think when I had, believe it was Todd Boland on, and he was just talking about this surge of interest in gardening and growing, and you know, so there were good things. There have been good things that have come from this slowdown, for sure. But we're kind of glad to be moving out of it, because you are also the proprietor of the St. John's Haunted Hike and the offshoot, the Signal Hill Ghost Tours. Those projects, now they are fixtures in Newfoundland tourism, and will they be back this summer?
Fingers crossed. We're selling tickets. I think everyone in the tourism industry is really excited about kind of getting back to some version of what we were before. I think there's still a certain amount of nervousness about, you know, what the state that we're in right now, like, you know, about personal safety and health and whatnot. But all indications are it's going to be kind of a big year for Newfoundland tourism. I think there's a lot of interest. I know personally, just from my own family, like people who haven't been able to come home for 2 years have all bought their tickets. My wife has a birth sister who was born here, adopted in Ontario, and has never been to Newfoundland. And this is the summer that she's like, pandemic's over, we're coming home. You know, she's never been here, but she's bringing her daughters and getting to explore that. So yeah, as a tourism operator, it's really exciting.
Really.
And I think, you know, people often have wanted to go to Newfoundland because of, you know, like icebergs and puffins and you know, the natural beauty. But when they get here, it really is the people and the culture and the stories that people want to experience. So that's been, you know, I started the ghost tour business in 1997, so it's been running for a long time now. And I think the greatest compliment that I ever get from guests who come on are when locals come on one of the tours and say, "Oh, I grew up in St. John's and I never went down that alleyway," or "I'm from such and such a place and I'd never heard this story that you tell." That to me means that we're doing something right, you know, that we're being able to share some of these stories and reintroduce people to the histories and the creepy stories of where they
the creepy, scary ones. And I think a lot of these stories, almost as blogs, can be found on your webpage, I think. And if people want more, and I did have your social media handle up there, and also you're very active on Facebook as well. So yeah,
and just recently, you know, I feel it's probably the death of the social platform when 50-year-olds start making TikTok videos. That's a sign it's time for all the youngsters to leave. But I've started doing some TikTok videos and sharing local ghost stories, and it is a very young audience. You know, it's all like kids in their 20s, and they love it. They love having those stories about their hometowns and those urban legends and stuff. It's been a lot of fun, and I get all these kids emailing or messaging and saying, "Oh, do one for, do one for Robert's Arm, or do one for Deer Lake. And it's great to be able to kind of share my love of stories with kind of the next generation of Newfoundland storytellers.
Well, now that you've brought this up, everyone's sitting here thinking, well, what are they like? We want to see one. We want to see one, Dale. I want you to do it right now.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'll tell you one of the stories, because one of the fun things for me as a storyteller and as a writer with doing things on Facebook or TikTok, they have to be short, right? Like, you don't have 27 minutes to talk. You've got 40 seconds.
Well,
so the other day I was doing one for Witless Bay. Someone had requested one for Witless Bay, and there's a story from Witless Bay about a woman who left her son, her child, out in the yard while she was doing dishes. And when she came out, the boy was gone, had disappeared completely. The garden gate was still latched, no sign of him. Family searched everywhere, and eventually they found him a far distance away, like over a great big marsh. There was no way he could have done that all by himself. And people started to say that he had been taken by the fairies. That was the fairies that had taken him away and brought him back. And from that point on, every night around the same time when he had experienced this mysterious disturbance, this little boy would go to the window and kind of knock on the glass and wave to unseen people. And he did that every night, and he stopped eating, and he basically pined away for these unseen friends that he couldn't go and join. And eventually he just kind of withered and died. And people said it was always because that the fairies had kind of laid their charm upon him and had kind of bled him dry of his spirit. And people said in Witless Bay that was a true story. All my stories are true stories, though, Catherine.
Yes, of course they are. And what was it? You take bread in your pocket or breadcrumbs when you go in with the woods for the fairies? Is that what it is?
Yeah, that's a really good example of kind of Newfoundland folklore. So there is this tradition here. Mothers would do this if your kids were going out to play. You'd put bread in their pockets as a charm, a protection against the fairies. And we often think of fairies as being very Irish, but that's a really good example of a West Country English tradition that came over with the very early English settlers to Newfoundland and persisted here. And it's a story that people still tell me all the time in Newfoundland. And apparently, if you go back to Devon and Dorset, where those early settlers came from, it's a bit of their folklore that has been lost. But we've retained it here in Newfoundland. So put some bread in your pockets, and the fairies won't be able to take you away.
We're good at that. We're and then if worst case scenario, you got a bit of grub.
Exactly. If you get hungry, you're good.
You're good. Dale, thank you so much. I just want to pop your book up again before we go and remind people there's a lot to learn in place names of Newfoundland and Labrador, written by Dale Jarvis. Thank you for being my guest today. It's been fun. I know we couldn't have a good time sitting around telling some stories. And you even teach how to do it. So maybe I'll show up there someday.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you, folks, for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Let's Get Writing, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Don't forget, you can check out all the episodes on my YouTube channel at Catherine Taylor TV. Have a great day. Bye now.